We that work with Gentiva are no different than you. We bring a loss history with us as we go through life as well. You have seen someone speak tonight who's lost a son. You have seen someone speak who has lost a mom, someone who has lost a father. There is loss in each life, and we can feel comforted that we heal enough to reinvest in life. And tonight I asked one of our, they are now called managers of clinical practice. And I say that now because, periodically titles change and we have to remember what to call people. And Les Harp is an RN, and he manages one of our teams. And these people work hours and hours, and I know that you know that. But Les has a history that includes a loss that when it came time for him to reinvest in life, led him to be a hospice nurse. So with that, I will let Les tell you how that journey brought him here tonight.
Thank you guys for coming tonight. This is about us, and not just the staff, not just the families, but us as a community, as people that lean on each other, no matter what our station is. So when Vicki and I started talking about this, I think she was a little surprised that I was eager to do this. I was excited to do it because it's my story, and that's what we were talking about in her office a few weeks ago, and the power of story. When I think about what we're doing here tonight, we call it a remembrance service. Sometimes you'll hear a memorial, but all of it ties into that same word that surrounds memory, and the memory of the people that impacted our lives, whether they were our mother or father, grandparents, husbands, wives, children that we've lost. We carry their memory with us, and that keeps them alive. Thomas Campbell, who is an author and a physicist, said, "To live in hearts we leave behind is not to die." So as long as those people are in our hearts, and our memory of them is in our hearts, then they're not gone from us. They're still with us. That's called legacy. When you look at your children and your grandchildren, that's legacy that you're leaving behind. And what they're going to carry with them is memories, and how they convey those memories is stories. So to birth a story, you have to have a memory. So I'm going to tell you my story tonight. First, I came across this quote by Maya Angelou, and she wrote, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." It is freeing to tell your story, to share your story with others. As you go through what they will call the stages of grief, I'm sure everybody tells you what your stages of grief are, right? We talk about it all the time when we come out and speak to people. Vicki, I'm sure, talks about it. And everybody kind of wants to put things in a little box and little stages and steps of things you have to go through, the order you go through them in. Doesn't always work that way. Sometimes we're going through one stage of grief and then we find ourselves bouncing back to one that we should have already been past, right? And we feel like, well, I thought I was over that. It's a process. Part of that process is sharing your story about the people that impacted you and that are no longer here. Okay. So my story goes a little something like this. In the fall of 2003, I had started to school. I graduated high school, never went into college. I decided I was going to travel the world with a Christian rap group, if you can believe that. which lasted about a year. But it was great fun. After that, I figured I needed to work because I needed to make some money to live. And then I met a young lady, and we had a child. And he graduates here in a couple weeks from high school. So I'm real proud of that. And that's my legacy. She and I didn't stay together, but he and I did for sure. And through all that, I landed at the Home Depot. Both my parents worked at Home Depot at the time, and it was easy to get a job there. And I ended up spending 12 years doing that in retail. And if you've ever done retail, you know what 12 years of retail will do to you. You'll see the gray. In the fall of 2003, I was remarried. My wife, her name was Cassie, and she was an RN. Beautiful soul. And she always pushed me because I guess she saw something in me and said, "You need to go back to school. You're not making the most of your life." And I agreed with her, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And of course, being a nurse, as I can tell you, most of the other nurses here will tell you, when people come to us and say, "I don't know what to do with my life," the first thing out of our mouth is, "Be a nurse." Because it's great and we love it. It's not for everybody, but we're going to damn well tell you it's for everybody. So in 2003, I had started back to school because my wife was hounding me to go to school. And I thought, I'll go for a business degree, right? I'll get her off my back and I'll make a little more money and all that good stuff. I'd started back to school, and I found out that I loved going to school. And I sat in the front of a classroom, and I was 30-something years old. I wasn't an 18-year-old kid anymore. I was going to pay for that class. I was going to ace that class. And I really enjoyed it. So my second semester, I was at work one day, and my wife had gone to the doctor. I knew she was going to the doctor. She thought she had a little hemorrhoid, right? But it didn't go away. So she thought it was odd, but as most nurses will also tell you, we're the worst patients. So she kind of let it go for a while, and then finally she went in, and I got a call that afternoon at work, and I picked up the phone. Thank you for calling Home Depot. And it was my wife, and she was in tears. And I'd never talked to her before where I heard fear in her voice. And I heard fear in her voice that day. And I thought, what's this about? And she said, Les, I came from the doctor. I don't want you to panic or get too upset. But what I went for isn't a hemorrhoid, it's a tumor. Now, we don't know if it's cancer or not, of course. But your mind always goes to that worst place. Now that I'm a nurse, my mind really goes to that worst place because I know what the worst places really are. So we went to have the tumor biopsy. Any of you that have ever dealt with cancer, this next probably 5 minutes or so is going to sound probably very familiar to you. We had the tumor biopsy that came back cancer. It was a very aggressive form of colorectal cancer. So, chemo and radiation. And after several weeks of that, and then several weeks of healing from the chemo and radiation, because as you can imagine, the particular place this cancer was, radiation wasn't very kind to that part of the anatomy. Very painful thing. But she made it through. Strong, strong woman. And we went through our scans, as you do after you get treatment, and there was nothing on the scan except for one small nodule in her lung. So, of course, then you go down the road of biopsy again. Oh, it's the same cancer, so we're going to treat it with chemotherapy because radiating the lungs is really a risky proposition. Lungs are just very sensitive. So no radiation, but another 6 weeks of chemotherapy. That was fun. Another 6 weeks of recovering from the treatment. and then another scan. And this time, the scan showed cancer in both lungs, in lymph nodes, in the adrenal glands. So we sat down with the oncologist again, and he said, well, we're going to try something different. It's a newer chemotherapy, and I don't know if it's going to be effective or not, but we're going to try it. And we said, we're going to try whatever can be tried. And so we did. And about 3 weeks into that treatment, it was on Valentine's Day, as a matter of fact. So almost a year after her diagnosis, we were sitting over here at Texas Oncology. If any of you guys know where that's at, it's right around the corner. And we're in the infusion room, which is just a big room like this. It's kind of sectioned off into a few rows. And everybody just kind of sits in these kind of nice lazy boy chairs and gets treatment, chemotherapy. And while we were there, she was a few minutes into it and something went haywire. She started gasping for breath and panicking, and the nurse ran over, of course, and stopped the infusion, and her heart rate was in the 130s, which for you non-nursey people is pretty bad. And they shipped us out over to Harris emergency room, and they admitted her, and they got things calmed down, and they said, we're going to go ahead and do another scan. This time they did a scan of her brain. And there was a tumor in her brain that was putting pressure on the part of her brain that controls all that stuff, your heart rate, your breathing, basically your ability to live. So we went from there to home with a radiology appointment for radiation. Now, knowing what I know now, I know that what they were sending us for was called palliative radiation. It was just to see if they could shrink that tumor in her head just a little bit to give her some relief and maybe give her a little more time. After a few treatments, the doctor sat down with us, and I remember him holding her hand and tears coming down his face. By the way, if you find a doctor that'll sit down and hold your hand and cry with you, you found a good doctor. But he said it's time, I think, to go home and talk about hospice. And that was really the first time I'd ever really heard that word. I mean, I heard hospice, but I had no inkling of what hospice was. None whatsoever. But now I found out it was so that she could die. And so my first impression of hospice wasn't a very kind impression, because I didn't want her to die. But I know now that she was dying regardless of what we did. And the kindest thing that we could do was to make sure she was comfortable during her last days. And a hospice came in, and the nurse sat down and said, let us take over. You're going to be the husband now. You've been the caretaker, which again, I didn't know I'd been being the caretaker. I can remember picking her up in my arms because she was too weak to walk, and carrying her to the bathroom. I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to do it. She was that weak, and it just needed to be done, so I did it. I had told her for those years beforehand that I didn't want to be a nurse because I didn't want to deal with taking care of people on blood and guts and piss and poop and all the stuff that nurses deal with. And she always told me it's really not like that. There's not that much of that. And for the reward that you get, it's well worth it. So hospice came in, and I told you all this stuff kind of started happening on Valentine's Day with us going to the hospital and the brain tumor and then the radiation. So Valentine's Day is when that started, and March 9th of 2005 is when she took her last breath and she left the world. So in basically the span of a year, we went from being completely, what we thought, completely healthy to a funeral service. And it was devastating. The people that are in my life, that are closest to me and my family, can tell you how devastating it was for me. honestly thought they were going to lose me, and they honestly were pretty close to being right. But I dealt with my grief in my own way. I didn't go to a counselor. I didn't accept bereavement. I didn't know what bereavement meant. I just thought, this has happened, and now I've got to move on one way or the other. So after my period of grieving, what I thought was my period of grieving, now I know that there's no period of grieving. There's just grieving. But after I got to a certain point, I thought, time to get on with my life, go back to school. But at that point, I knew that I wasn't going to go for a business degree, that I was going to do a nursing degree, or at least try to. I didn't know if I was smart enough or compassionate enough, or whatever it took to be a good nurse. I knew it was a good career. I watched my wife do it. She was always happy. She jumped into work. She loved it. So I went to school, and I had a 4.0 average, and I applied to the nursing program, and I got in the first time I applied. And if anybody in here has ever thought about doing that or checked into it, nowadays it's not so easy to get in your first time in nursing, so it's very competitive. But I went to nursing school, and about a year into nursing school, I knew I wanted to do hospice. I wanted to at least try it. But I really felt in me that the people that came in the last days of her life were angels. Now, I've stood with families and had them tell me this, you're an angel. The difference is that I know how it feels to be on that side of it. And I know how it is to look at someone who's come in and who knows what to do and what's happening and what's probably going to happen over the next few days or few weeks. And those people are, you put them on a pedestal because they know something that you don't know and you're just wandering around in the dark. So I understand it. We're not. We're just human, just like you. We lose family, we lose loved ones, and we go through the same feelings. But anyone who impacts your life in that kind of time to you is going to be an angel. So I take pride in my nurses, chaplains, when they make a difference in someone's life, because that's what this is about. That's what hospice is about. So, telling my story has an impact. I'm not really in the field anymore. I don't have the pleasure usually of going to see patients. I saw a patient this morning, and when I see patients now, when I'm standing at the bedside with a family, it stirs something up inside me and makes me just want to do it more. But I was at a nursing home this morning seeing about a patient and their family and talking to them. And I realized that it's just in me. Those things are just in me. When I get in that situation, I start comforting and educating and doing all the things that we do. And I wouldn't have that had I not gone through the experience and the grief that I went through. And when I tell my story, it releases something in me. And I realized that this morning because it's been a while since I've been at the bedside. I spend most of my days stuck in an office and having other nurses come and ask me what kind of medicine we should give or what to do or tell me their crazy stories. And that's fun, but it's not quite the same. So when I get to tell my story, and when Vicki asked me to tell my story, something in me kind of jumped and said, yeah, do it. Because I haven't been able to tell it in a while. And I didn't always tell it to every family that I went into their homes. Not always appropriate, but I can tell you there were several times where I was standing with husbands and their wives were dying. And I could say, I've been in your shoes. What do you mean? And then my story. And it gave them comfort to know they weren't alone. And really, that's what going through this world is. It's not being alone, especially in those very, very dark times. So, usually my story kind of ends there because I had my beautiful wife that passed, and And I went to nursing school and became a hospice nurse, and I get to tell that story, but the story doesn't end. The story keeps going. So last September, in the mountains of Colorado, my wife and I got married just by a little waterfall by ourselves. We didn't have a minister. If you want to do that up in Colorado in the mountains, you can get a marriage license, and you don't have to have a preacher. Sorry, preacher. But we've both been married before. We both had our own stories, and we knew what was in our hearts for one another. And it was okay for us to just stand there by that waterfall and say the words that were in our hearts to each other. And it was great. And then we came back home and back to work, and 2 weeks later, my wife started having a severe abdominal pain. So it got to the point where, we probably ought to check this out. It's pretty bad. And this is a lady, by the way, who lives with chronic pain due to other conditions. So she knows what pain is. So when she said, I think I need help, I knew she really needed help. So we went to the emergency room. And the doctor there ordered a scan, and he came back in and sat down and almost matter-of-factly said, well, it looks like we're dealing with cancer. And the world just kind of slipped away from both of us at that point. So I got to start on a new journey with my wife. She had surgery a couple weeks later, and then a couple weeks after that, she had another surgery to put what they call a port in so she could get chemotherapy. And then she went through 6 rounds of chemotherapy and another scan and another surgery to remove a thankfully benign tumor. And I wouldn't have been able to know what to do and know how to support her and know some of the things she needed. Does that mean I did the right thing every time or do the right thing every time? Absolutely not. But because of the experience I had with Cassie, I can turn that into an impactful thing for my wife. So I say that because we all have a story. That's why we're here. Every time I tell that story, I feel free. I feel a little lighter. I feel a little more, my shoulders can just arch back and my head can be lifted high. Not because of anything I did, but because it had such an impact on my life, and now I can impact other people's lives because of it. So I urge you to tell your story whenever you can. Sometimes you'll make it through your story. Sometimes you won't. Sometimes it's too painful to get all the way through the story, but that's part of the healing. So tell your story. Before I go, Sonia, will you stand up? Oh, I know. So embarrassed. This is my beautiful wife, Sonia. Thank you guys for coming tonight, and Vicki, I'll turn it back over to you.